You can see the front line copy pasted on Google Maps. Genius. It just goes to show how fast the situation can change. For 3 weeks, barely any change, and all of a sudden, everything changes within 24 hours. And they launched a successful helicopter raid on Russian soil. The most important battle of the Ukraine war, the battle that would decide the fate of the war, will take place right here. The Russians have effectively broken through that area. You see there's a lot of forests. They've broken through. It will be the shock of the Titans. You've seen the Marvel movies? It's gonna be even crazier than that. Hi and welcome to History Legends. Here's the latest update about the Russo-Ukrainian war, and I promise you we have a lot of things to talk about. I was at a gathering with people, I looked at the news, I was like, no way! And I was like, okay guys, gotta go. Just for you, massive news. The Russians abandoned their siege of Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine. Take a look at that. No more Russian forces near Kyiv. It just happened today. The entire West Bank, no more Russian forces. And on the East Bank, massive withdrawal. They abandoned Brovary, Boryspil. This is the past. They're now 130 kilometers away. So we'll talk about why the Russians abandoned the siege of Kyiv. And we'll also talk about what can possibly happen starting from now. Here was the situation in Kyiv on March 31st, 3 p.m. You can see all the blue areas. These are the places where the Ukrainian forces counterattacked the Russians. Let's focus on the left bank here. We can see that Makariv completely liberated, the entire highway Kyiv-Zhytomyr also liberated, and Irpin also a big chunk of the city liberated as well. Now let's take a look at a terrain map to understand what happened. So, Russian forces advanced from Chernobyl right here down towards Kyiv. But you see that this entire area, there's a lot of forests, which naturally favors the defenders. The Russians were stopped right here, Irpin, Moshun, here the highway, Kyiv, Zhytomyr, here Zhytomyr, Kyiv, important highway for supplies. You have Makariv here, Borodyanka. These are the most important cities. Now, as you can see, Ukrainian forces managed to hold the Russians in this sort of cauldron. And as you can see, there was this sort of forest barrier, you know, the dark green, some sort of forest. It's actually swamps and forests, which are very hostile to mechanized forces like the Russians. They could only move within this open terrain, but the moment they wanted to pierce through, they were stopped. And small groups of Ukrainian infantry could inflict heavy damage. Now, if you want to look at what it looks like on the ground, I can give you an example. Let's go here, for example. You see? Pure forest. You can't see anything. If you're a motorized vehicle, any guy with an ATGM can destroy your convoy. And if you zoom in, you have even more swamps. For example, right here. You see? This is where Russian forces would come from, and then you have pure forest. And for the longest time, Russian forces have been blocked at Irpin. Now you can see to enter Irpin, you have only a few entries. You have this road here, you have this road here, you have a couple roads, a lot of bridges. You see you have the Bucha river here, so you have to cross the river. Most vehicles can only cross through bridges. The Russians could not bypass the city. Everywhere you had this swampland forest area, you had bridges, rivers, you had to capture Irpin. And then it's like a scenario like Thermopylae where a small number of defenders can hold off a huge enemy army. And the Russians tried to bypass Irpin with the highway here, but same scenario, you always have this forest. They tried to take Makariv, but same scenario, you have to cross this area. And small groups, small Ukrainian guerrilla groups can easily infiltrate and attack supply columns. The Russian plan to capture Kyiv was bad since the forces on the west and east banks of the Dnieper could not support each other. Napoleon would be proud of the Ukrainian defense. Using a central position, they could send reinforcements wherever it was needed, counterattack with superior forces, and defeat the enemy in detail. Now, if we look at the map of April 2, The 2nd of April, look at that. No more Russian area. Ukrainians have counterattacked everywhere. You see right here, this area on the map is all this here. A massive push. Only the troops in the cauldron here remain. Bucha, Hostomel, the airport. This is where the Russians stayed up to today. But everywhere else, they're losing ground. And if we look at the Wikipedia map, you can see they're gone. Here's another map. Look, you can see how all the blue settlements are the ones that were recently reconquered by Ukrainian forces. Massive moves. Now, what I think happened is that not all the positions were heavily defended by the Russians. The Russians announced a massive withdrawal from Kyiv. Ukrainians believed that only 20% of the forces would be withdrawn. But now we notice that more and more Russian forces have left the West Bank. So how I imagine things happening is that the Russians simply abandoned villages, abandoned positions, maybe fought rearguard actions, and then Ukrainian forces quickly took over the land. Now the Russians say that this withdrawal is 100% according to the plan. I don't buy it, nobody buys this. They claim that it was just a diversion, but I'm sorry, you don't send half your army in your diversion and stay stuck during a month for a secondary objective. Now they're just trying to save face by saying it was normal, everything was planned. Now, you see that the map here, the Russians are almost gone from the West Bank, completely gone. And I'm going from one map to another. But check this out. If you look at this map here, try to zoom in a bit, they even recaptured the Chernobyl power plant. Now the thing, why a withdrawal to Belarus is pretty sneaky smart from the Russians is because Ukrainian forces can't enter Belarusian territory. So the Russians can safely withdraw to Belarus and the Ukrainians have to stop at the border. But the entire Russian offensive on this side of the Dnieper has failed. When we look at the battles on the 31st of March, it just goes to show how fast the situation can change. For 3 weeks, barely any change. And all of a sudden, everything changes within 24 hours. See, Brovary here, there was a lot of battles. There were even battles at the beginning at Boroshpil. The Russians attempted to encircle the city. Ukrainians sent all their troops, all volunteers, all foreign volunteers, all territorial battalions, terbats, everything to Kyiv to avoid this encirclement from happening. Now you see the situation. Now if we look the 2nd of April, they pushed. Brovary is so small on the map now. So small. They pushed far beyond. And if we look at this map, look at that. Here's Kyiv. They pushed all the way. Everything has been abandoned. Everything is gone. Now, why is this important? Look at that. If we look at this map here, Svitanok. The Russians were at Brovary. They retreated up to Svitanok right here. 130 kilometer withdrawal. And you see here Nizhin is also in Ukrainian hands. That means the Russians are withdrawing, but a lot of the places they left behind are now hindering the retreat. Even at Chernihiv, the Russians wanted to encircle the city. They took the city of Slavutich. They were attempting to encircle the city. And all of a sudden now, you have the forces at Chernihiv breaking the siege. That means the Russians are well around the city, but Chernihiv can be supplied by Kyiv. That makes it not a siege anymore. Disastrous situation for the Russians. Now this is the problem of the new Russian doctrine. Their goal, their objective, their ideology was to send armored columns deep into enemy territory and block enemy supply lines and take over the land as fast as possible. This is generally good. This is what the Soviets did during World War II. However, they did not have enough men to accomplish this strategy. That means this is a bad strategy. When you want to build a strategy, you look at what you have available and you build from there. Now the problem is, when they reached Kyiv, they did not finish off important logistical hubs like Chernihiv. That means they lost a lot of troops, a lot of effort surrounding the cities and securing supply roads. They hoped that by leaving Chernihiv behind, the city would surrender. After a month, nothing had changed. If we move on to the northern front line, you can see how there's a massive push of Ukrainian units here. Konotop, still in Ukrainian hands. Nizhin, still in Ukrainian hands. Sumy, still in Ukrainian hands. As you can see on the map, Kyiv here, You move up, you have Chernihiv, and then you have Sumy. Taking Sumy and Chernihiv should have been a major Russian objective starting day one before moving on to Kyiv. And the problem is, look at that. This entire highway here, Sumy, Kyiv, this entire highway was constantly attacked by Ukrainian guerrilla groups. You've probably seen some videos online. Tons of trucks destroyed. That means that the Russians had so many troops in this area, spread out, little units trying to secure the roads. To provide you an example, there was a unit, 2/3 of the troops were spread out from the Russian border up to Kyiv, and only 1/3 of the unit was actually fighting at Brovary. So they're already 2/3 down the initial strength. And then they can't even get the supplies. We're talking ammunition, lubricants, we're talking spare parts, we're talking fuel, food, whatever. So even that 1/3 is not 100% combat effective. Now, if we look at here, you can see on the map something interesting. You have the radius 25 kilometers around Kyiv. This is something that Chris Cappy from Task and Purpose talked about a lot. This is the range of Russian artillery to hit the center of Kyiv. And you can see Ukrainian forces fought tooth and nail to the death for Russian forces to be beyond that range. And the fighting was brutal. The mayor of Irpin, the city here we talked about earlier, said that the Ukrainian side lost 50 killed and 200 wounded for the battle of the city. We don't know if it's in the last month or in the last days. I feel that it was in the last days. It gives you an idea of how hard the fighting was in the area. And there was also these entire images of this 40-mile Russian column. But you see, it was literally stuck. It was stuck here because you just have to look at a terrain map and you see that it's not suitable for mechanized forces. They have nowhere to go. And overall, look at that. Russia is here. If you want to attack Kyiv from Belarus, you need to go all around here. You have to go to Gomel and then bring your forces here. It's a massive detour. It was a logistical nightmare. Even on this forbidden map, you can see how Ukrainian forces have completely taken over this area. No more Russian forces. Ukrainian armed forces took over Bucha, Borodyanka, Ivankiv, Irpin, and Gostomel, the airport. The scene of some of the deadliest fighting for a month. It took the Russians a month to get close to this area, and they abandoned everything within 24 hours. And you even see it here, the entire area northeast of Kyiv was never 100% secured. You see, that's the problem. On certain maps, it's read as Russian territory, but it was never fully controlled. A lot of Ukrainian territorial battalions kept attacking, and they did not necessarily coordinate with the central government, but whenever they saw Russian units, they would attack. Literally partisan warfare. So now let's talk about why the Russians abandoned the siege of Kyiv. According to the Russians, like we talked earlier, was because the mission was accomplished. They pinned down enough troops in Kyiv to achieve their objectives in eastern Ukraine. I think that's an easy answer. According to the latest reports only hours ago, Ukrainian forces thought that the Russians would only pull out 20% of their forces. And analyst sites like the Institute of the Study of War claimed that they did not even know what was this thing going on. They did not know why the Russians were pulling back. They didn't know if it was actually Russian forces being pulled back or if it was a rotation of units. That means that the units on the front line that lost a lot of forces would be withdrawn, sent back to Russia, new men, new equipment, and that new units would take their spot in the meantime. This is what the Ukrainians thought until a few hours ago. And then, I don't understand, nobody saw it coming. People thought that the Russians would consolidate their gains near Kyiv just to keep the Ukrainians busy in the area. No, the Russians managed to do this massive magic trick and disappear within 24 hours. Like Houdini, gone. Is it because the Russians are ending the war? Maybe. They're peace talks. But don't forget, there have been peace talks since day 2 of the war. So don't be distracted by peace talks. The Russians wage war in a different way than other countries. They always want to be in talks with the enemy. Now, what I think the Russians are doing is that they saw that they were wasting way too many supplies, too many men in a deadlock situation. They could not do anything. They knew that without Chernihiv or Sumy, they could not pursue an offensive towards Kyiv. So what many analysts believe is that they're pulling back their forces and focus on finishing off the siege of Chernihiv and Sumy. That's part one. However, there's something else we have to look at. Check this out. In this area, the Russians have completely abandoned their positions as well. Ortirka, all gone. The Russians have also abandoned the position. Complete retreat. A couple days ago, the Russians were threatening Poltava, were threatening areas left and right. They're gone. Again, that's the problem. They don't have enough forces to enact their strategy. And what could actually happen is that if they completely abandon Chernihiv, they can withdraw to Belarus again. Ukrainian forces won't enter Belarus. The Russians will simply protect the Russian border, and that could be the end for the battle in northeast Ukraine. In the meantime, you also had a massive Russian offensive around Mykolaiv. Check this out, this was the situation on day 19. Kherson taken. Mykolaiv was fully besieged from the south. There's only one bridge apart from Mykolaiv to cross over to Odessa, and it was at Vozhnesensk. The Russians launched a spearhead towards that city. What happened? They got pushed back. Again, not enough forces to capture this point. The raid failed and the bridge was in Ukrainian hands. If we look at the situation now, you can see how Ukrainian forces have launched a massive counterattack and reached Kherson Oblast, the region of Kherson. You saw a lot of news outlets say that the city of Kherson was captured or was threatened. It was actually the overall region, but still, they launched a massive offensive right here. All this region, Nova Odessa, all this was Russian, abandoned. It's very flat ground, so villagers are maybe 100 houses, but still, all this area abandoned by the Russians. In the meantime, the Russians tried to push to Kryvyi Rih. This town here is very important because not only is it the hometown of Zelensky, but it is also an extremely important strategic position. You're essentially at the back of the entire Ukrainian army. At first, Ukrainian forces were not strong enough to pose a real threat. They mined the entire area. The Russian forces could not advance unless they did a World War II Zhukov tactic and sending all their men to get obliterated by the mines. In the meantime, they brought in reinforcements, counterattacked. What you have to understand is that a lot of the positions held by the Russian forces were only held by a tiny force, a spearhead, stopped, halted. That means that a lot of the troops at Odessa now can safely go to Mykolaiv and attack Kherson. Now, if the situation was not bad enough for the Russians, check this out. At Kharkiv. Now, what you have to know about the Russian army at Kharkiv is that the general there was among the worst of all the combat generals during the invasion of Ukraine. He was so bad, he got fired. General Yershov of the 6th Army, fired. In his sector alone, the Russians lost 8 high-ranking commanders. 8 commanders killed in his sector. It was a nightmare how he handled the Battle of Kharkiv. No progress at all. The historian inside me just sees Kharkov, as the cursed city of the Russian army. Whenever they step foot there, they face a massive military disaster. Ukrainians inflicted massive losses to the Russians there. Now, it's very possible that Ukrainians also lost a lot of forces. That's another topic. What happened at Kharkiv is that since the Russians were stabilizing the front, it allowed the Ukrainians to take over the initiative. And they launched a successful helicopter raid on Russian soil. They striked a fuel depot at Belgorod, right across the border. They were flying low, they got inside Russian territory undetected by all the anti-air capabilities and got back. The Russians were shocked. I believe the Ukrainians will launch more and more attacks towards Kherson. Thing is, the Russians know this. Thing is, one large Ukrainian mechanized force launched a head-on attack on the highway, but it was stopped by Russian artillery. What you have to know is that although the Russians have a lot of weaknesses, the Russian artillery is their best strength for the past 200 years. 250 years. Russian artillery is a beast. Russian artillery strikes destroyed that Ukrainian mechanized force between Mykolaiv and Kherson. What I think the Russians are doing is that they're reinforcing this entire sector. Now, what I believe is that for the past month, we've seen Ukrainian forces successfully defend areas. And this can be done if you have a lot of raw recruits. Defending is generally easier, especially with territorial battalions. They can easily cover some ground and defend. However, launching an attack is much more complicated, especially with territorial battalions. So you'll need your professional troops. Now, Ukrainian forces lately have not shown the best capability to counterattack strong Russian positions. Like I said earlier, I think a lot of the ground they took over was because the Russians abandoned it. Ukrainian forces lost a major battle here at Izyum. Izyum was the equivalent of Irpin for Kyiv. It was a city cut through by a river, and it was the only gate to Donbass. Whoever holds Izyum holds the key to Donbass. But you see it's all red here. All red. Not only is Izyum red, but Topolsky, Kamyanka, and a lot of the villages south of Izyum. The Russians have effectively broken through that area. You see there's a lot of forests. They've broken through. Ukrainian forces launched a lot of counterattacks. They launched one near Balaklia. You see it's red now. It's Russian, so counteroffensive did not work. They launched one here, Kyiv, but it was halted as well. I'm just looking at maps. Only from the map, this is what we can see. Here at Izyum, Ukrainian forces launched 2 brigades, paratroopers, to counterattack. Did not change the situation. Izyum is in Russian hands. The Russians are withdrawing a lot of the men from the north. What happened is that they withdrawing the troops much faster than what everyone in the West anticipated. Are they going home? I don't think so. Everything points to all these reinforcements being sent to Donbass. All of them, especially towards Izyum, as you can see here on the map. That means that 40,000 additional troops will be sent to Donbass, towards the cauldron that I've been talking about for a few weeks now. We witness something huge. The most important battle of the Ukraine war, the battle that would decide the fate of the war, will take place right here. This cauldron has 50,000 Ukrainians, among the best units of the entire Ukrainian army. 50,000 men. It's huge. Now the Russians could not do much about it. They did not have enough men. But the latest reports show that the Russians have convoy after convoy from all over the country going to this area. You also have a lot of Russian volunteers that have been recruited lately. 1,000 in the Wagner mercenary group alone, and 2,000 from South Ossetia, and probably some Belarusians as well to provide rearguard duties. That way it can free up a lot of professional Russian soldiers for the battles to come. The thing is, this maneuver is a huge gamble. It will be the shock of the Titans. You've seen the Marvel movies? It's gonna be even crazier than that. And the Russian soldiers are mad. There has been footage, you probably saw it, of Ukrainian soldiers mistreating, executing, torturing Russian prisoners of war. Obviously, I can't show you the footage. It's pretty disgusting, horrendous. Ukrainian authorities should immediately sanction the people who committed these acts. Mistreating prisoners of war is never a good strategy. The media kept talking about the low morale of the Russian army. Now, what do you think is the morale of the Russians? How many Russians do you think want to surrender? You know Russian soldiers are not allowed cell phones on the front line. That's why we only have overwhelming footage from Ukrainian sources, because they carry out their cell phones left and right, or separatists or Chechen soldiers who are allowed cell phones. Russian armed forces personnel, not allowed. However, their officers are gonna show the troops on the phone and be like, here, this is what's gonna happen if you think of surrendering. The war has taken a sharp turn, and I don't think we'll see as many Russian soldiers surrendering as easily as before. This goes to show how the battle of eastern Ukraine will be massive. During the withdrawal, the Russians have continued the missile strikes on important Ukrainian military facilities. One after another, ammunition depot, weapon depot, or fuel depot, all destroyed. Even the Ukrainian administration admitted that their war potential, their military potential, is on the ground, super low, and it's getting worse. The Russians also destroyed, right here, a massive oil refinery at Kremenchuk. Not only is it massive, it's the only one in Ukraine. The only place where you could output fuel. Every day, it was pumping out 7,000 tons of fuel, enough for 9,000 armored vehicles to function every 24 hours. But now it's gone. The Russians solved their logistic problems. By completely withdrawing from the area, they said, you know what, screw that, there's no point. That means that all the Russian supplies will go to Donbass to fuel the battle. What about Ukraine? How far can they go if all their ammunition depots are destroyed? If all their weapon depots are destroyed? If all their fuel reserves are destroyed? How long can they fight? Even the tank repair facilities, destroyed. Everything is destroyed. You see the front line here in Donbass. You need to bring the fuel to all the troops here. You need trucks to bring all the material. Do they have enough trucks? And if they do they even have enough raw material? It's gonna be a massive battle. In Mariupol, the siege continues. Look at that. This is the region the Russians control. It might be even more than that. A lot of this area right here is under Russian control. What happened is that the Russians managed to section the defenders of Mariupol in 3 groups. This is bad for the defenders. They can't coordinate defense anymore. They're fully separated. One massive group is at the port in the south here. One group is on the north here. And the massive group is at the Azovstal factory. The city was defended by 15,000 soldiers. There are only about 5,000 to 7,000 left. The battle has lasted for over 3 weeks. The Russians will soon launch a major attack on Azovstal. And talking about this massive factory, the Ukrainian Air Force launched multiple raids, helicopters trying to rescue the commanders and other soldiers from that Azovstal factory. But they've all been shot down. The latest attempt, 2 helicopters filled with about 14 men each, shot down in midair. You see here's another map. You see the troops here at the harbor. There's one grouping at the harbor. The Ukrainian Marines up north. And then you have the bulk of the Azov battalion, or rather the remainder of it, in the Azovstal factory. Check this out. We have another map here. You can see the front line copy pasted on Google Maps. Genius. Now you can see all the new regions liberated by Ukrainian forces. The Russians have completely abandoned Chernihiv. I don't think that they'll stay. I think they'll retreat into Belarus as well. There's no point of staying there. Same for here. What I wanted to show you is this area here. The Russians will defend this at all costs. Expect heavy enemy resistance. Now, at Mariupol, here we have a better view of the actual situation. This is the actual front line as of today. The factory, half of it remains in Ukrainian hands. There's a river here. There's not much to defend. There's the port and there's some residential area by the Ukrainian Marines. They're separated in 3. They won't be able to last very long. But they did what they were asked for. And in a way, it's a tactical defeat, but it's a strategic victory because it made the Russians lose so much time and effort that they basically abandoned the siege of Kyiv. 100%, there will be a movie, Hollywood movie about this battle. 100%. Some Ukrainian official close to Zelensky said that the Russians are only gonna entrench themselves, fortify their positions, and keep everything they've had up till now. And he said that Ukrainian forces are not currently strong enough. They lack the heavy equipment to launch an offensive. We talked about it. They can defend areas. It's another thing to counterattack. Everything points towards the big battle in Donbass. The fate of Ukraine lies right here in the steppe of eastern Ukraine. 50,000 men right here. A lot of Russian reservists have been called up back to their barracks for early April. And by the time these men go to their units and go to the front, it's about a week. Within 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, the Russians will launch their massive offensive with approximately 50,000 more men. Look at that. Izyum. We talked about it earlier. Very similar to Irpin. Very, very similar. There's a forest on both sides. The Russians managed to break through. There's battles here. They should have never crossed. The Russians should have never passed by this area. And in a way, what the Russians said about diverting as many troops around Kyiv as possible makes sense. Because this is where all Ukrainian brigades should have been. This is where they should have blocked the Russians at all costs. Look on this map. Kyiv under Russian control, whereas on the other maps, it was in Ukrainian hands or contested. So you see the fog of war, very complicated. You don't really know what's going on. Okay, we'll take a look at the cauldron. You have Severodonetsk, Slavyansk, Kramatorsk. Triangle here. A lot of forces are stuck. You had this entire region here, the Ukrainian Maginot Line, heavily fortified areas. The Russians are fighting for every inch. Thing is, once they pass through that Ukrainian Maginot Line, there's not much behind it. The Ukrainians defended this area, fortified this area for 8 years. Here, a lot of villages captured. A lot of villages here captured. They're doing a massive push in this area. They're launching more and more units to reach that forest area. Once the Battle of Mariupol ends and reinforcements from Kyiv arrive and from other regions in Russia, they will be either positioned right here in Izyum and here. The troops from Mariupol will move up here. So you're gonna have men in Balaklia and Izyum. You see Pavlograd. It's the major base of Ukrainian forces. What the Russians could do. They could launch an offensive from Balaklia right here to Pavlograd. Push to Pavlograd. They could push here to Barvinkove and they could push to Slavyansk. Take up all this area. Then I fear that the entire Ukrainian front collapses in the south. You see it's not going well. Velika, Novosilka, they could push right here. They could push at Huliapole. Could push right here. If they move close enough, if they push north, they can halt all traffic on the E50 highway. One of the main routes of supplies for the men here, for the 50,000 men stuck in this cauldron. Pushing here, if you push right here, it's open ground. There's no major urban area. Now, in one of my first videos, I said that they would do a major encirclement, but they don't have any men. They don't have enough men to do that. So what they'll do is that, just like in Mariupol, they'll section enemy forces. This cauldron will be cut in many parts. We can already see here, for example, the push. They're gonna close off Severodonetsk. They're gonna push from all sides, close this cauldron right here. They're gonna push here, from here. They're gonna push to Kramatorsk, from here, close off this entire section. And then maybe here, move up north and close off this entire section. If the Russians take all this, it's open bar. They can go to Zaporizhia, they can go to Kharkiv. The entire dynamic of the war will have changed. These are the latest news. I hope you enjoyed my analysis. This is not something that you see every day. A lot of changes happened in the past 24 hours. If you're new to this channel, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you like the information you received and want to support my work, you can check out my Patreon. The link is in the description.